Okay, this is a video covering Chapter 12 of Building Vocabulary Skills. If you want to follow along in your book, you can open up to page 72. Alright, so here's the words for the chapter. If you want to take a moment and try and guess at the parts of speech of these, you can do that. The sixth word, reciprocate, is an 8 word, so that should help you with that if you want to pause and take a guess. Alright, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. Alright, so here's our first word, adapt. After many years of being a student, I found it hard to adapt to the schedule of a full-time job. Gina adapted well to California. She had no trouble adjusting to living so far from her family and friends. So in this case, what adapt means is it means to become accustomed to. And what that means is to become used to something, become familiar with something. On page 73, the word adapt is number 7. To adjust to a situation. So adapt normally means that you make some changes to help you fit into a new situation. So for example, one of the ways that you guys are adapting to living in the US is by taking ESL classes. Another way that you're having to adapt is you're having to adapt to the food that we have here. I'm sure that even when you're cooking your own traditional foods, there may be some things that you can't purchase here, so you have to adapt to those changes. One of the things to keep in mind with adapt is that it's often followed by the word to. So in the first one, it's adapt to the schedule. So it means that you're changing to fit the schedule. In the second one, she's adapting to California, meaning she's changing to fit in California. Dismay. Dismay is a verb. Aaron was dismayed when he realized that he wouldn't have enough money to buy a special gift, special birthday present for his girlfriend. The doctor knew it would dismay Karl to learn that his injured leg would never regain its previous strength. So dismay means to discourage. On page 73, dismay is number 10, and it says to discourage, to make fearful or uneasy. So dismay can have a couple of has a couple of meanings in it besides just being discouraged. Dismay also has the meaning of a surprise. It's discouraging you because it's not what you expected to happen. You're learning some news that is surprising about the future. So for the first example, we're to assume that Aaron thought that he would have enough money to buy his girlfriend a special birthday present, but he was surprised and upset and saddened by the fact that he didn't. In the second one, Karl was dismayed because he learned that his injured leg wouldn't regain its previous strength. So what that means is that he was sad to learn that he thought that his leg was going to be as strong as it used to be, but he was sad to learn that it wouldn't. So keep that in mind with dismay. Discourage, in a sense, discourage means to make you not want to do something. But dismay really means that you're surprised because something that you thought was true is not true, or is the opposite of true. Okay. So moving on, exile. So exile is a noun. Now exile is a word that can also be a verb, and the meaning is very similar. But in this one, we're talking about the noun meaning. So the political rebel decided to end his 5-year exile and return to his native land to oppose the government. Fernando fled his native country 30 years ago and has lived in exile ever since. So what an exile is it's a separation from one's homeland. Now, one of the things, the majority of you are not in your homeland, but the majority of you, I'm guessing, are not in exile. On page 73, exile is number 4, a separation from one's native country through force or choice. Now, let me explain that a little bit more. Exile normally means that for some reason you're being forced to leave the place that you call home. It could be through force, meaning that someone kicked you out of the country, because like in the first example, the person was a political rebel. So the person was kicked out of the country because they were opposing the government. So they're being forced out. So they may want to return, but they can't return. In the second example here, Fernando fled his country, means he went away from his country. But when you're fleeing, when you're running away, it's because something bad is there. So in this second example, Fernando, it was his choice to leave, but he can't really go back there. Because it's unsafe. So a lot of people, things have changed now with Cuba, in that Cuba has opened up its borders, but a lot of people were in exile from Cuba because they ran away from Cuba because the situation was very bad there, and they weren't able to return. Now they may be able to return. So, if you want to consider yourself, you would be in exile if you left your country because you had to, and you can't go back, and you can't really go back there. Okay? Gesture. So gesture is a noun. As a gesture of sympathy, the neighborhood association sent flowers to Millie when her husband died. The other workers' gestures of friendship made Vic feel at home on the first day of his new job. And so what a gesture is a signal. So in the picture there, the gesture that she's making is she's waving high. On page 73, gesture is number 2, and it's something said or done to show intention or attitude, indication, and also a signal. So what a gesture means is it can be a physical thing. So the most common one of the most common uses of gesture is talking about hand gestures. So those of you guys who are taking 33, your teacher may say, when you give a presentation, you should use hand gestures to make your points. So this is one common use. But a gesture can also be not something physical, but it means that something that is done to show something else. So for example, in a lot of cultures, like in the US, this used to be more true. It's less true now, maybe still in small towns. But one of the gestures that people would make if a new person moved into the neighborhood, one gesture is you would bring them a cake, right? Just to show that they are welcome, right? The cake means you're welcome. Another gesture that we make, if someone has won something, like when I was a child, I used to be in plays, and so after the play, as a gesture of congratulations, you would give someone a flower. So a gesture means that you're doing something to indicate something else. Okay? All right, so recede. Recede is a verb. The heavy blanket of clouds finally began to recede, allowing the sun to warm the crowd at the football game. Walter had to wait until the flood waters receded before he could get to his house to see the damage. So what recede means is to go back. And we see here the picture of a receding hairline. So this guy's hair used to be further forward, but it's going backwards. On page 73, the word recede is number 8, and it means to move back or away from a particular point or limit. So in the first example, it's saying that the clouds receded, meaning that they were covering the sun, but they moved back away from the sun. In the second one, we're saying the flood waters, right? So a flood is when there's too much water and the water rises, and when it recedes, it means it goes back down. It goes back down to where it was. So recede can mean a couple of things. One thing here is we're saying, like with the clouds, meaning that it's going away from a certain point. But in the second example, it means that it's going down from what it was normally. So recede has this moving, this point, this meaning of that you're moving backward from some point. It doesn't mean to just walk backwards, right? Recede means to move backwards from some specific point. All right, so here we have reciprocate. I've done reciprocate. Is a verb. I've done many favors for Anne, but she never reciprocates by doing a favor in return. Hakeem treated me to dinner, so I'm going to reciprocate by taking him to a movie. So reciprocate means to pay back. On page 73, reciprocate is number 3, to do in return, to pay back. So reciprocate means, again, we have this re here, which means again. But what reciprocate means is that someone has done something for you, and as a gesture, here's that word again, you do something back for them. So you'll notice here in both of these ones we have by following reciprocate. That's kind of a clue, but it's not 100% of the time. But it may come up on the quiz, so you should notice it. So what in the first one, it says, I've done a lot of things for Anne, but she doesn't do anything back for me as a favor. So in the second one, he paid for my dinner, so I'm going to pay him back by taking him to a movie. So reciprocate doesn't mean that you're giving back the exact same thing, but it means that you're doing something in return for something that was done for you. Okay, but it doesn't mean the exact same thing, and it doesn't mean by actually paying money. So if someone took me out to dinner, I'm not going to reciprocate by giving him the money for my dinner. That's not reciprocating. I would reciprocate by doing something nice for him in some other situation. So here we have refute. Refute is also a verb. The lawyer was able to refute the defendant's claim that she was home the night of the murder. He had found a witness who saw her in a mall store that night. Some science fiction fans were disappointed when photos of Mars refuted the idea that intelligent life exists there. What refute means is to show to be wrong. So on page 73, refute is number 6, to prove wrong or false. So refute has this meaning of that you're using some evidence to show that something is wrong. So in the first case, the lawyer, this is in court, is showing that the defendant's claim, the defendant says that she was home, but using a witness who saw her at the mall store, he's showing that she was wrong. In the second one, the thing that refuted the idea that there's intelligent life on Mars is actual pictures of Mars. So when you refute something, it means that you're using some evidence to show that something is wrong. You can't just refute someone by saying you're wrong, because you're not giving any evidence. You have to prove that someone is wrong. So the next one here is retain. So retain is a verb. Plastic storage containers often retain the odors of foods. I have one that still smells like spaghetti sauce after 10 washings. I can usually retain my sense of humor, Janice said, but I lose it totally when I'm laid off and break up with my boyfriend in the same week. So retain means to hold on to. So on page 73, it's number 9, to keep. So retain means that something has happened, that the normal state is to have something, and then there's a change, and you keep on having that thing in a situation where maybe that thing should have gone away. So for example, in the first one, we have odor means the smell. So you probably have this experience, there's some foods that if you put them in a plastic container, even after you wash it, you can still smell it. One of the things I really vividly remember is that when I was 12 years old, my family moved to Malaysia, and the house that we moved into, a Japanese family had lived there. That's not super important, except for the fact that they ate a lot of fish, and they stored a lot of fish in the freezer. So even though they'd left, and even though the freezer was clean, it still smelled of fish, and it took 6 months before that smell went away. And I remember it because I don't like fish. In the second one, the retaining your sense of humor. Sense of humor means like you can laugh about life, but when bad things happen to you, it's hard to keep that sense of humor, right? So retain means you're holding on to something, even when something else has happened that should take it away. Revert is a verb. After his release from jail, Sam reverted to his old habit of stealing and ended up in jail again. Helene gave up smoking while she was pregnant, but she reverted to a pack a day after her daughter was born. So what revert means is to go back. And we'll notice here is that revert is often followed by the word to. Okay, so on page 73, revert is number 1, to return to a previous habit or condition. Now at this point it's good to take a look at the word recede again and talk about how it's different from the word revert, because they both have this meaning of to go back, right? The meaning that it gives is to go back, but the words are actually very different. Recede is actually talking about a movement. So it means that things have moved to a certain point and now they're moving backwards. But revert is not talking about movement, it's talking about a change in behavior. So in the first example, he's reverting to his old habit. It means his behavior had changed. So in the past he had been a criminal. He changed to being not a criminal, but when he reverts, his behavior goes back to his old behavior. Okay, so it's not talking about any movement, it's talking about a change in behavior. In the second example, Helene used to smoke. She got pregnant, she changed that behavior, she stopped smoking. But when she reverts, she goes back to the old behavior. So the difference here between recede and revert is that recede is really talking about a movement, and revert is talking about more of a change in behavior. All right, our next one here is ritual, and ritual is a noun. So rituals, set practices that are repeated regularly, are important in most religious traditions. Each time Mary Ann must fly, she writes a check to a charity, brings it with her on the plane, and mails it at her destination. She believes this ritual guarantees a safe flight. And what a ritual is a ceremony. On page 73, ritual is number 5, and it says a ceremony, any actions done regularly in a set manner. So rituals are often used with cultural things or also religious things. So for example, the wedding is a ritual. So most now weddings are totally different, but most traditional weddings in the United States would follow a certain pattern. The groom, the man who's going to get married, would be standing up with the priest and all of his groomsmen, and then the bride would come down the aisle with her father to be given to the groom. This would be a standard ritual, because this is something that would be that's a set way of doing things that's repeated. There's also certain rituals that we have, culturally. So, for example, there's been a change in this, but my brother-in-law is Turkish, and in Turkey, there's this ritual of circumcision, where boys, when they reach a certain age, they have the foreskin of their penises removed, and it's religious as well as cultural. But there's a big ceremony. The boy wears this special white gown, he gets his fancy hat, he goes and gets his picture taken, and then, after it's done, he's given money by all of the family and stuff like this. So this would be a cultural ritual. But rituals can also be individual, meaning something that you do regularly. So I often talk about my wife's breakfast ritual. My wife eats the same thing for breakfast every day, and she has it with a cup of coffee. But this is the way that she starts every day. So in this case, this would be a ritual, even though it's not really a ceremony, because it's a repeated action. We consider it a ritual. All right, so let's take a look here, and I'm going to sort of jet through these ones. You can take a second and pause and answer the questions on page 74, and then come back in this. So I'm just going to go through these answers to keep the video a little bit shorter. So the first one is, getting a D on the first math test of the semester dismayed Sean. He was sure he'd done well. So again, remember, dismayed means that you're surprised and disappointed about something that happened that was the opposite or different from what you expected. If the shoreline continues to recede, there soon won't be any sandy beach at all. So in this case, the shoreline means the place where the land meets the water. But if it keeps on going back, moving back, there's not going to be any beach at all. All right, so the next one, Antonio tried to refute my argument, but I was able to prove I was right. So refute means he's trying to say that I was wrong, but in this case he failed. In a gesture of cooperation, the manager and the head of the union shook hands. So the shaking of the hands, the meaning of it is saying that we are going to cooperate. To retain her strength and energy, Mrs. Green does push-ups, sit-ups, and leg lifts 3 times a week. So this means to keep, right? To keep her strength and energy. So remember, we said that retain means that you're keeping something in a situation where it might be difficult to keep. So, if you're working, it's hard to keep your strength and your energy. So in order to hold on to it, she has to do something extra. All right, my brother vowed to eat only 1 Oreo a day, but I'm afraid he'll revert to his old habit of eating the entire bag of cookies at a sitting. So again, here revert means to go back to an old behavior. You can see how it's different than recede. There's no movement, it's a change in behavior. As the Ice Age ended, some animals were able to adapt to the new climate. Those who could not adjust, failed to survive. So here again we see adapt and to. So the climate changed, the weather changed. So it means that you change to survive in that new place. The country's new dictator feared having certain political enemies in the country, so he sent them into exile. So he sent them away, and they weren't allowed to return. I always send Kieran a birthday card, but he doesn't bother to reciprocate with a card or a phone call on my birthday. So I do something nice for him, but he doesn't do anything back nice for me. Homer always goes through the same baseball ritual before he bats. He twirls his bats 3 times, stretches his arms, and says, okay, this one will be good. So in this case, this is a ritual that he has. Like I mentioned, my wife's breakfast ritual. It's not religious, it's not a ceremony, it's not cultural, but it's some repeated thing that they do. Okay, so go ahead and finish off the online activities, and then do the questions, and we'll go over those in the beginning of class. All right, take care. Bye.